Jackson Monroe sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the dented thermos in his hands. The walls of the small one-room apartment in Butte, Montana, were bare, except for a faded American flag thumbtacked above the window. Outside, snow flurried lazily, coating the parked cars and silencing the morning. Inside, silence was heavier. He hadn't turned the heat on, not because he couldn't afford it, his veterans' benefits covered the basics, but because silence and cold reminded him he was still alive. And sometimes that reminder was necessary. It had been 9 months since Jack left the military. 24 years in uniform, most of them in sand, dust, and the low hum of tension. Afghanistan had branded him in ways he still couldn't articulate. Now 47, he was supposed to be figuring out what came next. Everyone kept asking that. So, Jack, what's next? And he had no answer. His last real conversation had been at the funeral of Carlos Mendez, his former squadmate, buried just outside Bozeman. After the burial, Jack had driven down to a roadside diner, ordered a burger he couldn't taste, and found himself staring at the griddle through the serving window. The cook was Vietnamese, he remembered, and the place smelled like something both foreign and oddly familiar. That moment stuck with him, not because of the food, but because he'd laughed for the first time in months when the waitress accidentally dropped a ketchup bottle and splashed a kid's shoes. It had been a fragile, honest laugh, the kind that stings. And maybe that was why he chose to start there. Jack turned on his old phone and propped it up against a can of beans on the windowsill. The screen was cracked, but the camera still worked. He pressed record. My name is Jackson Monroe. I served in the U.S. Army for nearly 25 years. Infantry, mostly. 2 tours in Iraq. 3 in Afghanistan. 1 shoulder surgery. 3 bullet scars. 1 Bronze Star. 0 jobs since coming home. He paused, blinking at the lens, his voice steady but low. I've felt disconnected. Useless, to be honest. The war ended for me, but the silence didn't. I've been waking up and realizing I don't know what to do with my hands anymore. He looked down at his fingers, calloused but still. So I'm going to try something. Starting today, I'm going to take on 100 jobs in 100 days. 1 job per day. I don't care if it's washing dishes or walking dogs or sweeping sidewalks. The goal isn't to make money. The goal is to reconnect with people, with the country, maybe with myself. He hesitated, then gave a half smile. It didn't reach his eyes. I don't expect anyone to watch this, but if you do, maybe you'll see something that helps. Maybe you'll remember we're not as far apart as we think. He reached forward and ended the recording. Outside, the early sun was still struggling to break through the clouds. He slung a faded green military backpack over his shoulder, lighter than it used to be, filled only with a notebook, a pair of gloves, and an old Army ID. He opened the front door, stepped into the cold, and locked the apartment behind him. The diner was 30 miles east, a straight drive down Highway 2. He had called the night before, and the man who answered gave no name. Just a brief grunt and a clipped answer. Show up at 6 a.m. You'll wash dishes. No pay. 1 day. Bring your own damn shoes. Jack had smiled at that. It was the first voice in weeks that didn't ask if he was okay. He climbed into his truck, the engine sputtering before it caught. As the heater clicked to life, he glanced in the rearview mirror. His eyes looked tired. Not sad, just used, like an old rifle, cleaned but no longer fired. As the truck pulled onto the icy road, Jack whispered to himself, Day 1. And with that, the journey began. Not with a speech or a job offer or even hope, but with an empty backpack, an old ID, and the smell of cold grease waiting 30 miles away. The snow had thickened by the time Jack pulled into the cracked parking lot of Debbie's Grill. The diner looked smaller than he remembered, its chipped yellow sign swaying slightly in the wind. One of the bulbs in the neon open sign flickered like it had given up halfway. Jack stepped out of his truck, boots crunching over a thin sheet of ice. He pushed open the door, a small bell chiming overhead. The inside was warm in temperature if not in spirit. A few booths were already occupied by silent truckers sipping coffee, their eyes fixed on the muted TV in the corner showing the morning news. Behind the counter, a stout man with close-cropped black hair and deep lines in his face looked up. His name tag simply read, Hui. His arms were folded, and he didn't smile. You the guy? He asked without moving. Depends, Jack replied. You the one who answered the phone last night? Hui gave the slightest nod. You bring your own shoes? Jack glanced down at his scuffed boots. Steel toe. Not pretty, but they won't slip. Good, Hui muttered. Kitchen's in the back. Towel and apron are hanging by the sink. You'll be rinsing and stacking. No breaks unless someone keels over. Jack didn't expect a handshake. He didn't get one. He walked past the counter and through a swinging door into the kitchen. The smell hit him like a punch: grease, old coffee, frying bacon, and something vaguely burnt. Steam fogged the corners of the room, and a young man at the grill barely glanced up. Dish pits that way, he said, nodding with his chin. The sink was deep and already filled with murky water and stacks of plates smeared with gravy, eggs, and half-eaten toast. Jack rolled up his sleeves, tied the apron around his waist, and started scrubbing. For the next 2 hours, no one spoke to him. He worked methodically: scrape, rinse, stack, repeat. His back ached, his fingers numbed by the constant water. But there was something oddly calming about it. No noise except the clatter of dishes and the occasional order shouted from the counter. Around 9 a.m., the kitchen rhythm picked up. Orders flew in, pans clanged, and the grill hissed with oil. At one point, Jack dropped a tray of clean glasses. One shattered. The cook swore under his breath, and Jack bent down, carefully picking up the shards. From the corner, Hui watched. He didn't say a word. Later, during a brief lull, Jack stepped outside the back door to catch his breath. Snowflakes drifted down softly, melting the moment they touched his jacket. He took a deep breath, letting the cold cut through the haze of heat and kitchen steam. The door creaked open behind him. Hui stepped out, lighting a cigarette with a worn Zippo lighter that bore a faded Marine Corps emblem. Army? He asked without looking at Jack. Yeah, 24 years. You? Hui exhaled a long stream of smoke. Marines. 1 year in the jungle. 4 years in camps after that. Left Vietnam in '79. Jack turned to him. Boat? Rustbucket. Hui said with a chuckle that didn't reach his eyes. 2 weeks at sea. Pirates. Storms. 1 dead. 6 sick. We made it. They stood in silence for a while. The kind of silence only shared by men who'd seen too much but had no need to say it. Finally, Jack asked, Why let me work here today? You didn't know me. Hui srut. You said Army. That means you know how to shut up and get it done. Jack nodded, a grin tugging at one corner of his mouth. Fair enough. Hui flicked his cigarette into the snow. Lunch rush is coming. Better not let Debbie see you slacking. She bites. Who's Debbie? Jack asked. I'm Debbie, Hui said dryly, opening the door. Now move your ass. Jack laughed. An actual, unforced laugh, and followed him back inside. By noon, the diner was chaos. Jack had no idea pancakes could stack that fast, or that coffee could be requested with such military-grade urgency. Waitresses darted between booths like fighter pilots, calling out orders in shorthand, and Hui manned the grill with the calm ferocity of a man who had survived worse than a breakfast rush. Jack's hands were pruny and raw, arms sore from the constant washing, but he kept his head down and worked. He broke 2 more glasses, both times muttering apologies, both times ignored. No one had time to care. When the last of the lunch crowd finally filtered out and the clatter eased to a murmur, Jack stepped back from the sink. He took off his apron, wiped his hands on a clean towel, and leaned against the counter near the back door. His stomach growled. Come, Hui said without looking up. You eat now. Jack followed him through the kitchen to a cramped corner where a fold-out table and 2 plastic chairs had been squeezed between a freezer and a dusty shelf of paper supplies. Hui handed him a steaming bowl of something rich and fragrant. It's pho, Jack guessed. Hui's my Americanized. Broth from yesterday. Brisket from last week. But good. Jack took a cautious bite. He wasn't sure what he expected. Maybe bland diner fare dressed up with soy sauce. But the broth surprised him. It was warm, peppery, and comforting in a way that hit somewhere beneath the surface. "This is incredible," he said between mouthfuls. Hui sat across from him, sipping his own bowl in silence. For a while, they ate like soldiers in a trench, quiet, focused, reverent. Eventually, Jack spoke. "You said you were in camps. Refugee."
Huy nodded.
"After the war. I was 15. My father was re-educated. Never came back. My mother, she smuggled me onto a boat with my cousin. We drifted for days before making it to a UN camp in the Philippines." Jack lowered his spoon.
Jesus.
"We were lucky," Hui continued. "Some didn't make it. Pirates took everything. Women, children. My cousin died 2 weeks after we landed. Dengue fever." Jack said nothing. There was no right response to that kind of truth. "I came to the U.S. in '81, Hui went on. "Sponsor family in Fresno. They gave me a cot in the garage. First job washing dishes at a buffet. Just like you today." Jack smiled weakly. "Guess I'm walking in your footsteps." "No," Hui said, looking Jack square in the eye. "You already walked through your own hell. You're just trying to find where it ends." Jack felt his throat tighten. He looked down at the bowl in his hands, steam rising into the air between them. "I lost people too," he said quietly. "Carlos, my best friend, blew up during a routine sweep. I was standing 5 feet away." Hui gave a slow nod, his face unreadable. "I thought if I got out I'd be free of it," Jack continued. "But it's still there. The silence. The guilt. Like, I'm here and they're not. What am I supposed to do with that?" Hui didn't answer right away. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small, wrinkled photograph. It showed a much younger Hui standing with a woman and 2 small children, all smiling, all dressed in matching white shirts. "My sister," Hui said, tapping the photo. "And her family. They didn't make it." Jack took the photo gently, studied it, and handed it back with a soft, "I'm sorry. I kept washing dishes," Hui said. "Kept moving. Eventually saved enough to buy this place. Gave it my wife's name. She said it sounded friendly." "So there is a Debbie?" "There was," Hui said. "Cancer, 5 years ago." Jack looked away, unsure of what to say. The tiny plastic chair suddenly felt heavier, the room smaller. "We all carry ghosts," Hui said, folding the photo and slipping it back into his pocket. "But some ghosts push us forward. Others drag us under. You have to choose which ones you feed." Jack nodded slowly. It wasn't a quote from a psychologist. It wasn't the kind of thing you read in a VA pamphlet. But it hit like a bullet. Hui stood and gathered their bowls. "Come. We mop now." Back in the kitchen, the rhythm was slower. Jack scrubbed the floor while Hui restocked the pantry. They worked side by side without speaking. But the silence felt different now, less empty. More like understanding. As Jack wrung out the mop, he caught Hui watching him. Not with suspicion, but something closer to quiet approval. "You finished strong," Hui said simply. Jack leaned on the mop handle, sweat dampening the back of his shirt. "Wasn't sure I would." "You didn't give up," Hui said. "That's all that matters today." Jack didn't know how to respond, so he just nodded. As the sun dipped lower outside the greasy windows, the first day of the journey began to settle into his bones. Not just physically, but emotionally. He had scrubbed away grease, broken a few plates, and heard a story that dwarfed his own pain. And in doing so, something inside him shifted. Not healed, but stirred. The back room smelled like onions, cardboard, and frost. After the dinner prep was done and the diner lights dimmed, Hui wordlessly handed Jack a blanket and gestured toward the walk-in storage room behind the kitchen. It wasn't much, just a concrete floor, stacked boxes of napkins, and a space heater with more rust than heat. But Jack nodded his thanks without question. "You can stay," Hui said, pausing at the door. "Just one night." Keep the door cracked. Alarm locks automatically. Jack gave a thumbs up. Appreciate it. Alone, he spread the thin blanket over a pile of unopened flour sacks, using his jacket as a pillow. The hum of the refrigerator compressors nearby provided a low, constant white noise. In some strange way, it reminded him of the drone of helicopters. Steady, relentless, oddly calming. He laid on his back and stared up at the ceiling pipes, paint peeling and sweating with condensation. He hadn't slept in a bed that wasn't government-issued in over a year. Even at home, he usually crashed on the floor. Something about being grounded made the nightmares easier to ride out. He closed his eyes. At first, there was just darkness. Then the heat returned. The metallic taste of fear in his mouth. The ringing in his ears that wasn't tinnitus this time. It was real, deafening. He was back in the outpost, sand caking his boots, rifle shaking in his hands. Carlos was calling out. They were clearing the alley behind a bakery in Lushkurga. Then boom. The sound hit him like a wave, slamming through his chest. He turned. Dust everywhere. Couldn't see. Carlos? He was screaming his name. Carlos, Carlos. And then the world slowed. Carlos was lying in the dirt, eyes wide, chest torn open. Jack dropped beside him, grabbing his shirt, pressing down with trembling hands. But there was too much blood, too much silence. The smell of burning. Carlos opened his mouth but made no sound. Jack couldn't breathe. Suddenly everything fell away. He gasped awake, heart hammering, fists clenched so tight his nails had left crescents in his palms. The storage room was still, quiet, just a low hum from the cooler and the faint rattle of wind outside. He sat up slowly, pulling the blanket tighter around himself, sweat chilling instantly on his skin. He glanced at the backpack beside him. Still there, still zipped. He pulled it close and unzipped the front pocket. Inside was a small, dog-eared notebook and his army ID card. The ID photo stared back at him, hardened eyes, buzz cut, uniform stiff with ceremony. A stranger. He stared at it for a long while, then tucked it back inside. The notebook, still empty, stayed in his hand. He opened it to the first page and scribbled, Day 1. I remembered the sound again. I remembered losing him. But I didn't wake up alone. Maybe that's something. He closed the notebook and rested his head back against the flour sacks. The ghosts hadn't left. But tonight they didn't scream as loud. The sky outside was still the color of steel wool when Jack stepped out into the kitchen. The clock on the wall read 5:41 a.m. The diner wasn't open yet, but the lights over the griddle were on, and the smell of brewing coffee curled through the air like a welcome mat. Hui stood by the counter, placing 2 styrofoam containers into a brown paper bag. He glanced up but said nothing. Jack gave a nod, adjusting the straps of his backpack. His shoulders ached from the night on flour sacks, and the remnants of his nightmare still hung over him like smoke. You leave early, Hui said without turning. Thought I'd get ahead of the morning traffic, Jack replied dryly, then added, Thank you, for the room, and the food, and the chance. Hui placed the bag on the counter. 1 for breakfast, 1 for later. Jack opened it and saw a banh mi sandwich wrapped in foil and a container of warm rice and pork. You didn't have to, Jack said. I know. Hui slid a folded slip of paper across the counter. Jack picked it up and found an address scribbled in sharp, angled handwriting. A place to get your hair cut, Hui said. Friend of mine. Army.
Vietnam.
He won't charge if you say I sent you. Jack smiled, his fingers tightening slightly around the note. I guess I look that bad. Huh? You look like someone who hasn't looked in a mirror in a long time. There was no insult in the words, just observation. Jack appreciated that. I'm heading east, Jack said. Thinking of stopping in Miles City. There's a library there. Might see if they'll let me shelve books for a day. Don't get lost in the dust, Hui said, finally meeting his eyes. You have a compass? Jack patted his chest. Still inside me, just trying to calibrate it again. Hui gave a short grunt that might have been a laugh. Then remember this. People aren't jobs. They're stories. You're not collecting shifts, you're collecting truths. Don't forget to listen. Jack nodded, words catching in his throat. He started to turn but hesitated. Yesterday, when you shared your story about the boat, your cousin, your sister, you didn't have to do that either.
Huy rút.
Some ghosts need company. Jack swallowed the lump in his throat. Yeah, they do. He opened the door, the little bell above it jingling softly in the quiet morning. The cold hit him hard, but this time it felt sharper, clearing, like fresh air after a storm. He stepped outside, backpack over one shoulder, paper bag in hand. The parking lot was still slick with ice, but the truck started without protest. He set the bag on the passenger seat and pulled out his notebook from his jacket pocket. He flipped to the second page and wrote, Day 1. I scrubbed dishes for 10 hours and ate soup that tasted like memory. I met a man who crossed an ocean with nothing and gave me something I didn't know I needed, silence that understood me. I didn't fix anything, but I didn't run. Maybe that's enough for today. He tucked the notebook away and gripped the wheel. The sun was rising slowly in the east, casting pale gold light across the snow. In the rearview mirror, he saw Hui watching from the window, arms folded, face unreadable. Jack raised a hand in a small wave. Hui didn't wave back, but he didn't look away either. That was enough. Jack put the truck in gear, the wheels crunching over ice as he pulled onto the highway. Day 1 was done. Day 2 waited. Jack pulled off the highway just outside of Miles City, easing the truck into a gravel turnout overlooking a frozen creek. The morning sun shimmered off the snow like a broken mirror, bright but not warm. He killed the engine and sat in the stillness, the ticking of the cooling motor the only sound. The paper bag sat untouched on the passenger seat beside him. He'd eaten half the banh mi sandwich at a red light, not because he was hungry but because it felt like something he was supposed to do, like checking the oil or changing the radio station. The pork and pickled vegetables had surprised him, again in the best way. Jack reached for his cracked phone, propped it against the dashboard, and tapped the record button. His reflection in the darkened screen looked older than yesterday, or maybe just more awake. He cleared his throat. Day 1, he began. Silence. He glanced at the snowy field beyond the windshield, then back at the camera. I spent 10 hours washing dishes in a diner that smells like burnt bacon and lost time. My hands ache. My back's sore. I shattered 3 glasses and learned how to scrub egg yolk off ceramic in a single swipe. He chuckled dryly. But that's not what mattered. He shifted slightly in his seat, his tone growing quieter. I met someone. Hui. He owns the place. Didn't say much at first. Just threw me an apron and pointed me to the sink. But after the last plate was scrubbed and the grill was cold, he fed me a bowl of soup and told me about the boat he came here on. Jack paused, pressing his thumb against the steering wheel, grounding himself. He lost everything. His father, his cousin, his sister. He came here with nothing but a name and a stomach full of seawater. And he built a life. A hard one, but his. He looked back at the camera, eyes steady now. Me? I left the military with a pension, a couple medals, and a whole lot of silence. Thought I had nothing. But I had way more than he ever did. And still, he was the one helping me. Jack exhaled slowly, letting the cold seep through the seams of the truck's windows. I don't know what I expected when I started this. Maybe I thought I'd work off the weight of the war, one job at a time. Maybe I thought I'd find redemption in labor. He gave a half shrug. But it's not about the work. Not really. It's about the people. About showing up. About seeing and being seen. And today I was seen. Not as a veteran. Not as some broken thing. He paused. Just as a man washing dishes. A crow cawed in the distance, the sound slicing through the hush of morning. I'm not sure where this journey is going. Hell, I don't even know if I'll make it to day 10, let alone day 100. But right now I feel still, for the first time in months. He leaned forward and tapped the stop button. Then, without hesitation, he tapped upload. No filters, no hashtags, just the title. Day 1. He gave me soup and silence. He sat there for another minute, letting the warmth of the sun creep across his hands. Then he started the truck, pulled back onto the road, and headed east. Next stop, the library. Back at Debbie's grill, the morning rush had begun. Bacon hissed on the griddle. The waitress called out orders over the clang of plates. A fresh batch of coffee percolated behind the counter, filling the space with the comfort of routine. But Huey stood by the front window, arms folded, barely hearing any of it. He watched as a beat-up green truck disappeared down the snowy road. Just a speck now in the distance, then gone. He stayed there a moment longer. "He left already?" the waitress asked, wiping her hands on her apron as she approached the counter. Huey didn't answer right away. "He left better," he finally said. She blinked. "You mean cleaner?" "No," he said. "I mean, lighter." He turned and walked slowly back into the kitchen, where a new mountain of dishes already waited. He tied his apron back on, picked up a skillet, and ran it under hot water. Steam rose like breath from a tired beast. On the radio in the corner, a Vietnamese voice read headlines from overseas. Something about a commemoration event for refugees. Huey didn't turn it off. He let it play. He worked in rhythm with the water, the radio, the breath of the diner. But when no one was looking, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled napkin. On it was the name he had asked Jack to write down the night before. Jack Monroe, Day 1. He didn't know if he'd ever see him again, but some people left footprints in silence. Huey smiled, just a little, and slid the napkin into a small tin box beneath the register. The same box that held old receipts, his wife's wedding ring, and a photo of the sister he'd lost. He didn't say anything more. He just kept working.